Rebranding is one of the most difficult decisions a brand can make, and not always goes well. Rebranding is about changing what doesn't work or what works but could work better. I know it's a little bit confusing, but today we are going to understand better this concept of rebranding and find out if this is the right strategy for your brand. Welcome. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us to Talking with Branders. In this show, we are going to talk about branding and all the different concepts related with this amazing world. If you are looking to learn more about branding, this is your show, so don't forget to subscribe. Today, we're going to talk about rebranding, a concept that in these days is very important for every brand. And that is the reason why we decided to invite a special guest. She is Margaret Molloy. She is the Global Chief Marketing Officer at Siegel Gale, the brand strategy design and experience firm founded in 1969 with a clear point of view that simple is smart. She is one of the most influential global marketing leaders. She has been featured in some of the top CMOs lists, including Forbes, top CMOs, the True Marketer of the Year, among others. Well, thank you, Margaret, for accepting our invitation to talk here in Talking with Branders. Can you share a little bit about yourself with our audience?
Hello, Luis, and I'm thrilled to join you and your Branders audience. I'm Margaret Molloy, the Global Chief Marketing Officer of Siegel and Gale. We are one of the world's preeminent brand strategy, design, and experience firms. I'm a native of Ireland. I'm based in New York City. And together with my colleagues at Siegel and Gale, we have the privilege of serving some of the world's leading brands. In fact, we've been in business for over 51 years, so we've seen a lot when it comes to branding.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing. Okay, Margaret, to start, I always like to ask this question to every brand that I talk always. What is branding for Margaret?
Well, I mentioned that we've been in business for over 50 years, and that heritage has helped us form a deep point of view on what branding is and essentially how branding has evolved. It's important to keep in mind, brand is not a logo, brand is not your tagline, brand is not an ad campaign, and it's not even the purview of the marketing department. Brand is measured by the summation of all touch points stakeholders have with your organization. The big shift to keep in mind is that brand is no longer about just words and pictures, it's about experiences.
That sounds interesting. Okay, now organization and professional used to think that rebranding is just changing your logo or in general your visual identity. But what is exactly rebranding?
Rebranding is a very misunderstood term. And I'll begin by saying it's vitally important when an organization embarks on a rebranding program to resource it appropriately in terms of time, money, and other resources. Rebranding essentially requires a complete and comprehensive reevaluation of every facet of a company's brand, from its visual and verbal identity to its purpose, even its products, services, capabilities, and vitally important, all of its touch points and its constituent experience with that brand. Sometimes people confuse rebrands with refresh. A refresh essentially is the notion that a brand needs to update its look and feel. So that may manifest itself primarily in the visual elements. But a rebrand is something much more profound and vastly different. And the question I would have your audience ask, if they are discerning whether or not they are engaging in a rebrand, is the following. Is this effort a sign of change or merely a change of sign? Said differently, is the entity engaging in substantial change or is it merely cosmetic? And depending on the answer to that question, the organization gets clarity on whether indeed the effort they're embarking on is truly a rebrand or a refresh, and that will necessitate different programs, different levels of resources, and different commitments.
That's very interesting. So why do brands rebrand?
There are a variety of reasons as to why organizations rebrand. A common one is change in organizational composition. For example, a merger acquisition or a divestiture changes an organization's ownership, and that ushers in a new era. Two examples. When recently Bristol Myers Squibb acquired Celgene, that created a need for a new brand. Similarly, in the area of a split, in 2014, Hewlett-Packard Company split into two entities, HPE, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and HP Inc. And that necessitated standing up one company and repositioning another. A second reason for the need for rebranding is expansion. Often companies simply outgrow their brand because of innovations in product, expansion to new markets, international markets potentially, or IPO. One limiting factor can be a name that essentially no longer represents the vast capabilities an organization is delivering. Dunkin' Donuts recently rebranded to Dunkin' to reflect a change in its food offerings. Another very common reason for a rebrand is executive changes. So when a company hires a new CEO or CMO, they join an organization because their ambitions for that company exceed the status quo. And a rebrand can be a powerful way to signal that change. If we think back to the legendary one in 1997, when Steve Jobs returned to Apple, the rainbow identity was replaced by a minimalistic identity. And that was signaling vast changes in that business, in particular, a renewed emphasis on simplicity. Another very practical reason for a rebrand can be a situation where a company's reputation is compromised and they need to signal that they are moving forward. An example here, when Lance Armstrong Foundation rebranded as Livestrong. Another important reason, and perhaps among the most common, is repositioning. Whether it be due to changes in market dynamics driven by competitive action or technology or any number of factors, a company may decide it needs to reposition itself to essentially continue or enhance relevance. Good recent example of this is A.T. Kearney, that rebranded as Kearney to reflect their desire to set themselves apart from what they deem to be a sea of sameness in the consultancy category. So those are among the primary reasons why companies go about a rebrand. And in all of those cases, the key underlying factor is that those are substantial business changes, not merely aesthetic or visual or verbal choices. They are much more profound and have the ability to profoundly impact customer or employee or other stakeholder experiences.
Well, I think this is very, very important to know to learn for brands. So what are the benefits of rebranding?
There are many benefits to rebranding when it's done well. And perhaps I would highlight 5. The first one is it raises awareness of an entity. The second, it establishes, or practically speaking, reestablishes relevance. A third benefit is a rebrand allows an organization to realign stakeholders around that entity's purpose. A fourth benefit is it can redefine a business model, consider new product launches, international expansion, etc. And finally, and perhaps at a strategic level, the most important benefit, it is that a rebrand can revitalize that vitally important intangible asset that is the brand. So many benefits, but many requirements to do it right.
Oh, this is amazing. So now that we know the benefits, what are the pitfalls of rebranding to avoid?
Yes, the pitfalls. That's a very important question, Louise, because a rebrand is not a panacea. And to assume that by changing the brand appearance, as it were, will improve the situation of a company is insufficient, of course. So let me offer some pitfalls. And the one I'm hinting at is the critical one. The focus merely on the visual or verbal elements without really focusing on any change in customer, employee, community, other constituent experience. Another pitfall is not resourcing the rebranding appropriately. Either a company runs out of time or budget at the launch phase and neglects to dedicate funding for employee engagement or other activations. Another common pitfall is the idea that we know this, that not leaving time and budget for research presents the opportunity, therefore, to miss a market insight. Another common pitfall is to not have metrics in place. So if you don't have a baseline metrics on your existing brand, then it's very hard to measure the improvements. And maybe I would offer a final pitfall is having too limited a team involved, confining the efforts to merely the marketing department and relegating rebranding to a marketing exercise. That's a critical pitfall because, as we said in the beginning, if your brand is measured by the summation of all the touch points, then everyone needs to be involved to execute on the new experience.
Very important, all these pitfalls to learn about. Okay, in your opinion, with this crisis, are brands facing the need to change and adapt? Can the changes brands need to implement be considered rebranding?
Yes, that's an interesting question. I believe brands are being challenged now. And the main area of challenge is around their purpose. COVID-19 and this pandemic is stress testing organizations' purpose. And we are seeing in every market and in every region, every category, the brands that have true purpose. Brands for whom purpose is in their DNA. It's an organizational principle, not merely a marketing artifact. Entities for whom purpose drives them, informs their culture and their activities. Those organizations are responding very well because they have a responsive purpose and they are activating it in the context of the new environment. For organizations that lack that clarity of purpose or lack a responsive purpose, they're struggling. So that's the biggest test of brand. It's the purpose component. Other phenomena we see is interest in heritage, brands that have a story and something of a nostalgia. So in a lot of categories, food is a good example, people going back to the familiar. Another dimension of brand behavior in the crisis is this idea of being useful, serving customers, utility. But those are all dimensions of brand behavior. The most important component that's being tested right now is the brand purpose. Is a brand's purpose fit for this environment? And if organizations find themselves post-pandemic in a situation where their purpose didn't serve them well as a filter for behavior, then that's the area that needs to be visited with most.
Okay, this is amazing. Now in these times, it's very important to understand how works rebranding, how works the changes that brand needs to do. So this is very, very amazing to learn. Well, Margaret, can you share 5 key elements to work in a rebranding strategy?
Okay, let me see if I can limit it to 5. Because for me, the way I look at this, Luis, is a rebranding program is an opportunity. So what are the areas that need to be avail of this opportunity? The first one is purpose. We touched on this before. Purpose is why our organization exists. Vitally important when you're doing a rebrand to visit with purpose. Why we exist, what we do, and of course our values are how we do it. Second thing, the visual identity. Is the visual identity representative of who we are and indeed our entire design system for every touch point it supports? Of course, the verbal identity is vitally important too. And one of the most critical elements of your verbal identity is your name. Your name is the first word in your story. So when you do a rebrand, it's important to appreciate if the name still serves its purpose. Another element to rework is all of the experience, all of those activations. So now that we know our story and we have our brand positioning, we have clarity around our visual and verbal identity. Now, how are people going to experience the brand? How are we going to show up for our employees, our colleagues, our customers, and the community? And the final, I don't know if this is 5 or 6 or whatever the number is, but the final really important opportunity is to see if when you're engaging in a rebrand, it presents an opportunity for simplification. What can you simplify in the customer experience? Be it through the language, plain language, be it through beautiful design, be it through product architecture, be it through digital experience. How do you make sure that you simplify the experience people have working with your company, engaging with your brand? Because right now, you touched on COVID, people are challenged cognitively. People are struggling to make decisions. It's impairing judgments, impairing decisions. So making it easy for a company to interact with others is really a tremendous opportunity. And rebranding, when that happens, can present an opportunity to visit with simplification.
Interesting. So Margaret, just to finish, what are some of the things on your rebranding checklist?
Rebranding checklist. Okay. So one element is have a brief. Be clear on what your goal is and why you're doing it. 2, establish a budget. Time, people, money, all of the elements. 3, do the research to understand the drivers of preference in your market. Audit your existing assets so you know what needs to be replaced. Assemble the team and make sure it's a broad-based team. It's often wise too to integrate agencies into the process because many of the skills required for rebranding are highly specialized. Have your metrics in place. Get your baseline so you have a basis of comparison. Be prepared for pushback. People don't always like change, so be ready for that. And of course, avoid the pitfalls that we mentioned earlier.
Well, great to know. This was this was very important for me and I know for our audience to learn more about rebranding, because I know in these days with all this crisis, brands needs to adapt and need to start to make some changes, and they need to understand if what they are doing is rebranding or is just a strategy, or what are they doing exactly. So I know this is going to help them a lot. Thank you, Margaret, for sharing all this information, for sharing all your knowledge in this amazing topic. can you share with our audience how can they reach you if they want to contact you, if they want to know more about you?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. Un placer. And certainly siegelandgale.com and all the usual social channels, and at Margaret Molloy on Twitter and LinkedIn as well. I'd also invite your audience to subscribe to a newsletter that I just launched on LinkedIn. It's How CMOs Commit. And you'll find that by looking at my articles on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Thank you again for accepting our invitation to be here in Talking with Branders. It was amazing to learn from you, from all your experience.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone.
And thank you everybody for listening to this new episode of Talking with Branders. Don't forget to subscribe, keep connected in our social media. We are in Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And if you want to learn more about branding, you can go to brandersmagazine.com. See you next time. Bye.